Okay. So have you had like much labor trafficking cases?
We have a lot. I mean, I've only handled a couple of them, but we have like a huge, uh, like a lot of.
Is there anything that EEOC can help with, or that might be good?
Maybe in the future with the cases we have now, we've already settled. We settled a civil case against the employer a few years ago, actually, like 2 years ago.
Oh, okay.
And but then it turned out that there's all this immigration relief available to victims, and that's what we're working on now is trying to get some T visas.
That's the big thing, yeah.
But then all these people who were not part of our original lawsuit have started coming forward, and so we're evaluating whether they have potential like civil claims that because they weren't part of the original case. So yeah.
So they have things expand, and when you start like any of us thinking of these issues, and it's great.
Yeah,
no, it really is, and this is so impressive, all the efforts, and seeing that this is coming into effect. It's exciting times.
No, I'm impressed with like the turnout, and especially because I mean I know some people who work in this area, like from the Anti-Trafficking Coalition. Yeah. All these people I haven't seen before, and I think it's great.
This is huge. The turnout. So, I mean, did you go to the Philadelphia ones? I missed the last two.
Yeah, I stopped going for a while because we had John.
John was who now is going to Chester County.
Yes, now he's. So we need to find another person to start going regularly.
Yeah. I guess I go to Chester the most regularly because that just seems to work well with my schedule. And Philly, so I guess I should let you go. Just so good to see you. I'm sorry I'm taking up your time right before you speak. I hope to see you soon.
Just amplifies your voice enough with a full room of people. It's
course. Yeah. Oh.
All right.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Oh, really? Oh, nice. That's great. Okay.
And then say,
that it stays live.
okay. Good. All right.
I don't know. Should I use this or? Yeah.
So it's prepared to me, write in an email, a pro bono guy, so you got anything on this record? He emailed me an email, I came here, I logged in, screaming at my computer while I was logging in, and then printed out the file real quick, and then the last 10 copies seconds ago. I'm pretty good at it.
You work for Meredith.
Yeah.
Okay. I feel like I've always seen you at Polish Meets, and recently I've seen Meredith.
Hi, everyone. We're going to get started in about 30 seconds. So if you want to settle and get your coffee, that would be great.
Polish meeting, so. You're 100% right.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. My name is Paul Jascott. I'm a member of the Women's Way Board of Directors, and I'm also a partner in the corporate group here at Reed Smith. For those of you who don't know, Reed Smith is a global law firm with 1,800 lawyers and 25 offices around the world. And this topic is a very important topic, not only to me in my role as a member of the Women's Way Board of Directors, but also as a partner in a global law firm. It touches our law firm in a couple of different ways. It touches our business. We have clients who have to deal with this issue. For example, in California, there was a recent law that was passed about transparency in supply chains for manufacturers, and we're asked by our clients to advise them on those types of issues. But it's also important to us as lawyers when we try to seek justice for clients in the pro bono area. And in fact, we had a human trafficking case in which a client named Anna was an Albanian girl who's now safely settled in New York City and married. But she was trafficked, she was kidnapped and trafficked in Italy, where she was forced into prostitution by the traffickers. She escaped, she got to New York City, and we successfully defended her in an asylum case. And as I said, she's now going on to a much better life in this country. So I'm proud, not only as a member of this firm, but as a member of the Women's Way Board of Directors, to have some influence and try to make a difference in this very important area. An important part of making a difference in this area is our executive director, who leads this effort in this organization. Her name is Wendy Vogt, and she recently joined us. Wendy has over 20 years of experience working to address gender inequities through a public health lens in both domestic and international settings. Earlier in her career, she worked as a counselor for Planned Parenthood, a caretaker at Mother Teresa's Home for the Destitute and Dying in Calcutta, and as a Peace Corps volunteer. Most recently, before she joined us, she was the Deputy Director for the Center of Public Health Initiatives at the University of Pennsylvania. And in this role, she initiated and facilitated a variety of interdisciplinary work groups. She supervised the center's grant-making program, managed staff and budgets, and did overall a whole lot of good for the community. So with that, let me introduce Wendy Vogt, our Executive Director.
Thank you very much, Paul. And I just want to say Paul is an amazing board member, and I'm so grateful to you for everything that he does, but also to Reed Smith for hosting us today. And also, Reed Smith is doing an in-kind donations drive for us for survivors of human trafficking. So you guys are really great, and we really appreciate it. And I am proud to serve as the Executive Director for Women's Way. We're the leading grant-making, advocacy, and education organization for women and girls in the Philadelphia region. And I'd like to first of all, thank everyone here just for being here today and being interested in this subject. It's such an important topic. I also wanted to thank Reed Smith for generously hosting us. It's such a beautiful space. I know several people have asked me, do you usually do things in this space? And I was like, I wish we did, but yes, it's a gorgeous space, so thank you. I'd also like to express our gratitude to Senator Stuart Greenleaf, a co-sponsor of Act 105 and a huge champion for women and girls. So we're so excited that you're here. And I also want to thank all of our panelists and our partners in the anti-trafficking community. There's a lot of people who work within that community who are in the audience, in addition to the people who are on the panel. And I'd like to also thank the Office of Councilwoman Blondell Reynolds Brown, who introduced a resolution yesterday commemorating January as Human Trafficking Awareness Month. So there's a lot of great things and a lot of goodwill going into this topic, and hopefully we'll be able to tackle it. At Women's Way, we strongly believe that raising the public profile of issues like human trafficking is the first step to ensuring equity, safety, and justice for women and girls throughout our region. So I want to also say a special thank you to our members of our board of directors who are here today. I see Julie Eubler over there, who's the chair of our board. I want to thank you for being so supportive of these kinds of issues. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention some upcoming Women's Way events, including our Women in Influence Conference, which will be on February 28th. It's a Saturday. It's free and open to the public. And this year, it's going to be focused on immigration and the issues that immigrant women and families face and how we can better serve the needs of those populations. And we also have our Powerful Voice Awards dinner, which is going to be taking place April 30th. So more information about all of these events is on our information table. And it's not on my card, but also we have our book prize, which is on May 11th. So I'm hoping to see all of you at all of these events. So Women's Way initially became involved in human trafficking and ending it over 6 years ago when we learned from the organizations that we fund that individuals are being trafficked right here in our region and that women and girls are being disproportionately affected by this system of exploitation. In fact, 80% of human trafficking victims are women and girls. So this is really central to the mission of Women's Way. Many times people hear about human trafficking and they think of it as something that just happens to other people or somewhere else. I think of it as an international problem, but not something in the United States. However, according to national sources, over 300,000 Americans fall victim to human trafficking every single year. And this is the statistic, actually, that upsets me the most. I mean, all of it is upsetting, but of those 300,000 Americans, the average age of a girl forced into sex trafficking is just 12 years old. So as we can all agree, this is just horrendous. The truth is that this crime is happening in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania on a daily basis. Individuals are both trafficked through Pennsylvania on their way to other destinations, and also Pennsylvania residents are targeted by traffickers and then exploited in our very own communities. They're being forced to work as field hands, as domestic slaves in Pennsylvania homes, and women and girls are prostituted every day on our streets through the internet, and also in establishments that are disguised as legitimate businesses. I know my eyes have been open to this, and I'm trying to be very aware now. We are here because also in 2014, due to the efforts of Women's Way advocates and advocates also around the state, many of whom are already here today, the previous governor signed into law the state's first comprehensive anti-trafficking law, Act 105. So you'll be hearing much more about what this means today directly from the experts who were instrumental in developing and now implementing this new law. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Senator Greenleaf, who's done so much for women and girls throughout the state.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to be here today and for your putting together this wonderful event for the law firm here that has made their facilities available to you, and of course the Women's Way, who has structured it and pulled it together. I've enjoyed working with Women's Way over this legislation over the years, and they were very helpful in not only helping to draft the legislation, but also helping to get support for it. Because this was not necessarily an easy piece of legislation. I mean, of course, no legislation is easy, but we had to have advocates, and they are advocates, no question about it. And I congratulate them on their efforts, past efforts over 38 years. During my time in the state legislature, I've been involved in issues involving women and children. Such as the No Mean No's legislation, protection from abuse actions by sexual assault victims. And that was just changed last session. I was the sponsor of that, as well as No Means No. Megan's Law, I've worked with PCAR, and it goes on and on. I'm not going to spend time going into that. But so I've had an interest in this area. And how I missed this issue, I have no idea. How did we all miss this issue? I have no idea. It's more like they were, the phrase, hiding in plain sight. And so we've just kind of accepted this situation of prostitution as an acceptable social norm, or we just turned our back on it, ignored it. There is not one area of this activity, and particularly prostitution overall, that we should allow in our society. There's no exception to this. Even in passing this legislation, there is still acknowledgement that this may go on. I had to make compromises on some portions of this legislation, and some of it dealt with law enforcement. And they wanted some language in there, and they're just, no, we don't want to make unintended consequences. But we had to fight that issue, that this is going to continue to go on, and let's not get carried away. That was basically what we were dealing with. Now, I've learned I have to make some compromises in passing legislation. I've had experiences in doing that. I was the author of the Open Records Law. And I guess it was Governor Ridge that came to me and he said, I'll compromise with you on this law if you'll compromise with me and reduce some of the provisions in it. And I said, no, I want it all. So we went to another person, they introduced it, they got passed, and now 10 years later they've made amendments, and now we're right where I wanted to be. So I learned a lesson. I was a slow learner, but I learned a lesson that you do have to get whatever you can after you do your battles, you get whatever you can in regard to this legislation, including this. I want to tell you a little story about myself, not because it makes me look good, it doesn't, but to show what what we're dealing with here. I'm not a newcomer to the criminal justice system. When I was first graduated from law school, I was a public defender for a year and a half in Bucks County and defended people in court and went up to the appellate courts on their behalf. I then went into the district attorney's office in Montgomery County and spent 7 years there and prosecuted murder cases, defended murder cases, was the chief of the appeals division, so appealed and handled hundreds and hundreds of cases on appeal to the United States Supreme Court and on down. And so during those years and thereafter, the only thing I wanted to be in the state senate is to be the Judiciary Committee chairman. I wasn't interested in anything else, leadership or anything like that. And so I was able to obtain that chairmanship, and I've been the chairman for about 28 years, I think now. And so during that period of time, all I had to do was impact the justice system. I got involved in politics and because of I wanted to see justice completed. And so what happened here is that, as I said before, after all that experience, I don't ever remember dealing with a prostitution case, and particularly a human trafficking case. Never. After all those years of dealing with no means no, and one of the first hearings I conducted as a chairman of that committee was in regard to child predators. And at that time, 20-some years ago, 28 years ago, no one was really talking about that, and they were always blaming the child. In fact, when we held hearings all over the state, we had child victims, and they would say, it was my fault, it was my fault. Venango County, it was my fault. In Philadelphia, it was my fault. Pittsburgh, it was my fault. And they'll get over it. And we don't can imagine it saying that now. We know better. But never did we deal with this issue. And but for the Polaris project, we'd still be going around blindfolded on this issue, and maybe most of us would be too. And so, I mean, it's probably the most horrendous crime I could think of. When you have predators out there that are roaming our shopping centers, looking for runaways who are supposedly experts in finding and looking at a child and knowing how vulnerable they are and how they're wanting to be dependent. And they have a need for a father, a mother, a dependency. And they pick them out. And there's the statistics. Again, I don't know how strong our statistics are on this, and we need better statistics, but the one I read was that 1 out of 3 children who are runaways, and these are teenagers, are ensnared by a pimp. And I hate calling them pimp, they're predators. Are ensnared by a predator within 48 hours. And then they're facing a life of abuse and degradation and brainwashing. They become supporters of their perpetrator, and they come and they support when the perpetrator is elected. When the perpetrator is arrested, he is then defended by the victims that he's victimized because they're so much in support of him. So I think it was in 2005, there was a song, It's Hard Out Here Being a Pimp, and they got an Academy Award for it, and we all were, that was great, it was wonderful. I mean, they belong in jail for 20 years, and they're not a hero, they're not a folk hero, they are violent, sexual, compulsive predators preying on our children all over the world and all over the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Go to a shopping mall and take a look at it. I think you can even see it. I was in the King of Prussia Mall recently. My wife was shopping, and I'm sitting on a bench waiting around, and she's a dear. I love my wife, and she's a wonderful person. She really is. But anyway, I start to look at around there, and some things that look really suspicious, but I don't know. And so it's happening though. The statistics show that it's happening, and we have to stop it. So after a Polaris project talked to me about it, we started working on it. First thing to do was how do we approach this issue? How do we solve this issue before I just introduce a bill? And they came back with our Joint State Government Commission is a think tank that researches issues for us in the legislature. And they did that with this, and they came up with the proposal. and then introduced it. It was introduced in the session before last, and we couldn't get it passed. It was a short time, but we did get it passed in the last session. It was signed last July. And we didn't even have a definition of what sexual trafficking was, human trafficking was. We had it for labor, but we didn't have it for sex trafficking. That's how bad it was in the situation. And so we've changed that. In the legislation, there's now changed. It's a felony to do that now. And the DAs are coming on board. In Bucks County, for example, there's if you know Route 1, and there's some sleazy hotels along there, and there's a lot of trafficking apparently going on there. And this guy from Philadelphia was up there trafficking women, and they arrested him. And you know what? Instead of being let go, like they usually would let go, he was put in jail for 20 years. And he belongs in jail for 20 years. And this is somebody that, yeah, I was tough on crime for a long time, but I'm trying to undo some of the unintended consequences we caused. But that's not unintended consequences. That's a situation that we need to be tougher on them. Delaware counties started to do that. They had one of their first convictions and prosecutions was in Delaware County, and Montgomery County. Risa Furman is also involved in that, doing that as well. So we have some tough penalties now in the definition. We also have some issues in regard to restitution for the victims. And finally, though, what we failed to do is have a state agency, a council, which would be used to educate the public. Because, you know, we can pass all the laws in the world, but if we don't have the public behind us, it's not going to happen. If we don't have law enforcement behind us, they're not going to enforce the law. So there's a program now, and Shea is involved with this, is having training for the municipal police officers in regard to human trafficking, and look at the situation completely differently. Look at the situation with different eyes, that the person he has in front of him is not the criminal. We've been treating the victim as criminals and the criminals as victims. We need to stop that. We need to look at that predator and know what that person is, and treat him and prosecute him accordingly. So we need to do, the most important thing we need to do is educate the public now, because we weren't able to get what we call a state council together and get it passed in that bill. So we had a compromise on that to educate people, because if we don't have public opinion on our side, as I said, it's not going to be successful. So what we've done is we've reached out to a lot of different groups and say, okay, all the advocacy groups, we wouldn't have had this bill passed without all the advocacy groups all over the state of Pennsylvania. And but they helped to get the legislation passed. Now we need their help to educate the public. And that's what you do. That's what Women Ways does. That's what many of your groups that you are representing do. And now this is what we're going to do. If they don't want to fund it, they don't want to create it, then fine. Then we're going to do it. And that's why I'm here today, just to talk about it and let you know, to open your eyes to this, is that we need to now intervene in their lives. We need to, even though we're going to educate the police officers, we have to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to do, what they're being educated to do. We have to know all those issues. When we see someone on the street and they're in need, after all those years of abuse and brainwashing, it's not a pretty sight. We have to not look at that and look at them as the child that they were, the child that was ensnared by this predator, and put them on this road, and to help them. We have some protections in the bill on that, but we need people, boots on the ground, and to intervene in their lives. It's not going to be easy. It didn't become that way in a few months, and they're not going to be turned around in a few months either. But we need people that are on the ground advocating publicly. And what's going to happen is that, and this happened in, I was the author of Megan's Law, and I worked on it for like 20 years. And at the end of the day, after all the scandals and the advocacy, finally it changed. And what it changed is the public opinion was now recognizing it, and what they were outraged. If you'd show them what's happening, the truth, public opinion will change on this. The public opinion is already in our favor here, but as far as getting additional legislation passed and what we need to be passed, we need their advocacy. And what happened in the situation with the child abuse issues, it got so popular that all the legislators were introducing bills about it. And now, personally, I think we've gone too far in some of it. The Megan's Law intended it to go to really the worst of the worst, and now we have kids that moon in high school are now on our Megan's list. So that's another story, another issue we have to deal with. But I hope we have that problem where we're having so much activity, so much support for it that we won't be able to completely eradicate it, but we'll do as much as we can and humanly possible to change this around, because right now it's just completely out of control. And you guys are the solution to this. You guys are the ones who are going to do this, both here in the panel and right here. And I'll be there shoulder to shoulder with you to do everything I can to help and continue to go all over the state advocating about this. As we are, just because the legislation is passed doesn't mean that we've won this issue and solved this issue. We've got to keep at this and keep at it until we do as much as we can to eradicate it in our state and our nation. So thank you so much for inviting me to be here. I look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. And at Women's Way and folks here, we can't say enough about the work that he's done and the help that he's given us on the human trafficking issue. My name is Diana Marcus. I'm the Public Policy and Advocacy Manager at Women's Way. I'll be moderating the panel. It could go well, it could not. I've never done this before, so if it goes really bad, you know why. But our panelists are wonderful. So we'll introduce the panel, and then I want to show you a short clip of someone who couldn't be here today. Everybody has a more extensive biography of each panelist in their packet, but Judge Lori Dumas, here on the end, has been serving as a common pleas court judge in Philadelphia Family Court, the Juvenile Division, since 2003. She's a graduate of Duke University and North Carolina Central University Law School. She serves as an officer of the Juvenile Court Judges Commission and is a member of the National and International Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. Wow, that's like a long name. Judge Dumas has been assigned to preside over many specialized court programs such as school violence, graduated sanctions, GPS, juvenile crossover program, JDAI, gang FFT, human trafficking, and juvenile gun violence task force. She is an officer of the Clifton Scott Green chapter of the NBA Judicial Council and graduate of the PA Juvenile Justice Academy, and is a Georgetown University Juvenile Justice Fellow. She's currently the co-chair of the Philadelphia Steering Committee Collaborative Against Human Trafficking. So this is Judge Dumas.
Good morning. Good morning.
Shea Rhodes, next to the judge, is the director of the Villanova School of Law New Institute to Address Commercial Sexual Exploitation. She has significant experience working with survivors of commercial sexual exploitation, prostitution, and human trafficking. She currently serves on the board of directors at Dawn's Place, the Greater Philadelphia region's only residential treatment facility for women who are victims of sex trafficking or commercial sexual exploitation. She sits on the oversight committee for the 1st Judicial District Project Dawn Court and an active member of Philadelphia's Anti-Trafficking Coalition and Pennsylvania Anti-Trafficking Advocacy Work Group, which is a statewide initiative in Pennsylvania that's community-based anti-trafficking coalition and state and national partner organizations that have come together. And I lost my place, sorry. Presently, Shea is working closely with and advising the First District Juvenile Court during the pilot program of the new court to help traffic children, and serving on a steering committee advising the First Judicial District of Philadelphia and the Department of Human Services on the response to commercial sexual exploited children in Philadelphia's foster care system. So this is Shea. Jamie is the Director of Anti-Trafficking and Social Services for the Salvation Army Philadelphia Social Service Ministries. Jamie is also an adjunct for Eastern University's Social Work Department, where she teaches a course on women's studies with a focus on human trafficking. Jamie serves as the board of advisors for the Villanova Law Institute to address commercial sexual exploitation. She oversees the administration of all funding and grants for anti-trafficking, including a newly awarded Department of Justice OVC grant to coordinate citywide victim services and response protocols. In her position as Director of Anti-Trafficking, she has been active in fighting human trafficking through three main areas of involvement: serving as a co-chair of the Social Service Subcommittee for the Philadelphia Anti-Trafficking Coalition, leading awareness, raising awareness and training and overseeing the development of the New Day Drop-In Center, which is located on Kensington Avenue in North Philadelphia. And the New Day Drop-In Center provides direct services and comprehensive care management for women forced into commercial sexual exploitation, forced prostitution, and sex trafficking. And so this is Jamie. And Liz Chacko, directly to my left here, is the supervising attorney at Friends of Farmworkers in Philadelphia. She began her legal service career representing low-income immigrants in Massachusetts in family law and protection for abuse matters. Since 2006, she's been employed at Friends of Farmworkers, and Friends of Farmworkers works to improve the working and living conditions of low-wage immigrant and migrant workers in Pennsylvania for over 30 years. At Friends of Farmworkers, Liz represents agricultural workers, food processing workers, landscaping workers, the workers employed through temporary non-immigrant visa programs known as the H-2B program, and she represents and advises workers on matters involving, among other things, wage theft, employment discrimination, including sexual harassment, labor law, and human trafficking. She participated in the 2012 Joint State Government Commission Advisory Committee on Human Trafficking. And this is Shea. I'm sorry. This is one of the folks that was originally supposed to be on our panel, but she had to be out of town, is Anne Marie Jones. She is a human trafficking survivor who is with Dawn's Place. And we felt that it was important to have her represented in some way to show a little bit of a perspective on who a human trafficking survivor could be. It's a very short 2-minute clip. It really only scratches the surface of who Anne Marie is. So if folks ever have a chance to see her speak or work with Dawn's Place, she's wonderful and the work that they do is wonderful. So we really encourage everybody to find another way to see her speak on her issue. Can we show the clip? So we're going to start the panel now, and what I wanted to let everybody know is there's some index cards in the center of the tables. If folks have questions that they'd like to incorporate during the discussion, please feel free to write down a question. Some of the Women's Way staff who are wearing Women's Way pins will be around. You can hand the questions to them, but we will also have time when the panel is over for folks to specifically ask questions as well. So the first question to all the panel members, we can just kind of go down the row, is what do you think is good about Act 105 and what do you think still needs to be done? We'll start with Liz.
Well, I think there's a lot that's great about Act 105. It's very expansive. From a labor trafficking perspective, which is where I come from, I think a great thing in Act 105 is the provision which allows for a private civil right of action for victims of human trafficking. You know, a lot of our clients are reluctant to pursue a criminal case against their traffickers, or they do pursue a criminal case, but then it doesn't go anywhere. And the option of pursuing a civil case against their trafficker is great, because they're able to get some form of justice and feel some kind of vindication in the end for what they've suffered. So I think that's great.
Jamie?
Okay, am I on? I am. Okay, so from a victim services perspective and social service world, where we work, it's flashing. Okay, here we go. Something that's good about new Act 105 is obviously the public awareness raising. Something that we see in our world, working with individuals who are in forced prostitution and forced commercial sexual exploitation, is a lack of awareness in specifically bridging between law enforcement and victim service providers. So Act 105 provides a new venue to be talking about the fact that potentially the woman on the corner of a street or locked in a hotel room is not out there by choice, and that there might need to be further questions that should be asked. So it's starting that conversation and that dialogue, and it's also providing for teeth for law enforcement. Shea often says this when we're trying to get it passed, but for law enforcement to actually go after pimps and traffickers under the statute of sex trafficking. And so that's been a huge new addition.
Am I on?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Well, Pennsylvania, although we were the second to last state to do so, much to our chagrin, now has a clear and distinct definition of sex trafficking. And I think that's huge. In 2006, when Pennsylvania enacted the initial legislation on trafficking in persons, and I'm paraphrasing, it just said forced labor or services, and sex trafficking was supposed to fall in or services. So we now have a clear and distinct definition of what sex trafficking is. We also have the 13 factors necessary for law enforcement to investigate and prosecutors to prove forced fraud and coercion. The other really good thing is the fact that we are now in line with the federal statute, where it is presumed that forced fraud and coercion are in fact present if the trafficking victim is a minor. It also makes sex trafficking minors a Megan's Law offense, which is obviously a no-brainer. Where I think work still needs to be done, and it's a start, the legislature put in a provision for purchasers, or the Johns, for buying sex. It's now a felony of the first degree. I think that this statute falls short because it says knowingly instead of knowing or should have known. So it's going to be kind of tough, I think, for a prosecutor to prove without some kind of statement from a purchaser that they knew the individual was in fact being trafficked. I also think it falls short in calling for diversion programs for trafficking victims. We don't prosecute domestic violence victims. We don't prosecute rape victims, yet you still prosecute victims of human trafficking. I don't think they need to be diverted in the criminal justice system. I just think they need to not be prosecuted and arrested at all.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Good morning. So, along with all of the enhancements of the Act, of course, there's enhanced protections for victims, enhanced opportunities for prosecution and of traffickers, and the call for enhanced prevention services at the state level, which is all wonderful as long as we can find the money to fund all of this. So, I think that the Act is definitely a step in the right direction. However, now we have to figure out how to get it done and how to get the legislature to put the dollars behind all of the mandates.
And we're going to talk towards the end specifically about resources and what can be done about that. So something else I'd like to pose to the whole group, I'm curious, since all of you come from a little bit of a different background, is how Pennsylvania is specifically affected by human trafficking, or in Philadelphia.
So in my work, we've seen that the labor trafficking is a real issue in Pennsylvania. Most of our trafficking victims that we're representing are from the greater Philadelphia area, so people who work in the landscaping industry, who work in agriculture, and who are domestic workers, you know, in addition to a variety of other industries. So I think, you know, it's happening, and it's happening a lot of times right before our eyes. Labor trafficking victims are, you know, I think the common perception of them is people who are locked in a basement somewhere, forced to work by threats of harm or by actual violence, and that's not what we're actually seeing. It is sometimes it's what we see, but often we're seeing people who are living on their own in an apartment, maybe for years at a time, but are being coerced or defrauded by their employer to continue to work in a situation where they really feel trapped and have no way of escaping.
We see trafficking kind of all across the city, across the state. There's a statewide network of advocates actually working on implementation of Act 105. So trafficking is happening across Pennsylvania, specifically here in Philadelphia. There's various sections and different fronts of sale to speak on commercial sex exploitation and commercial sex trafficking. You know, there's hotels. There are the massage parlors right here in Center City. There's Kensington Avenue, which is an open-air street track, and all of our staff, I just want to give a shout out to the New Day Drop-In, are over here. So these are the hard kind of feet of New Day Drop-In. But I just did a stat report for our drop-in from from April to November. We had 1,090 contacts with women on just Kensington Ave. That's a small little section of Philadelphia. We see about 20 to 30 new women discovering our center every month, and that's just a small section of the city. In addition to that, I just got a phone call, for example, this week from an attorney who has a woman who escaped from a massage parlor right here in Center City, who has a $10,000 debt that never seems to go away, and she's being forced into various forms of commercial sex acts, and she needs help and safety from the loan sharks who are threatening violence against her. So there's various forms of this, and that's really just an example of scratching the surface.
I think that, you know, Pennsylvania is affected everywhere, in every walk of life, in every community and culture that we have. And I think that one of the things that we kind of as a full society in Pennsylvania and in Philadelphia need to do is say to one another, okay, this is happening to all of us, to everybody. It's not something happening just in Kensington. It's not just happening at the hotels up on the boulevard that go up into Bensalem. It's happening everywhere. And I think that as a community of just human beings, we need to take a look inside of our own homes and our own churches and start saying, like, and this kind of gets into the next question as to why people are being trafficked, but why are people being trafficked? And put a stop to the sort of excuses that it's happening in other people's homes or other people's churches or other people's jobs. It's a human rights issue, and it affects all of us.
So in my work dealing with human trafficking, what we see is that this issue is infesting our population of youth. I exclusively service or serve these young people who are victims. Currently, I have a list of 25 young ladies who range from the ages of 13 to 21 who have been either arrested or found in stings and brought to us as family court as their support to try to help them to get better, to heal, to get out of the life, safety. And it is, what we're finding is that these young people were our young people from the beginning. They were a part of our system in some way before we even knew what human trafficking was. And so what that means is that in Pennsylvania and specifically Philadelphia, that it is more of an epidemic than we really realize. And as we begin to uncover on a daily basis all of the tragedies in the lives of these young people, and we do that through relationships with other people who are in this fight every day. I don't think that there's a day that any one of us who are working in this mission field, because that's what it is, does not uncover another life that needs to be rescued. And so it is very impactful on our communities, and it's a wonderful thing that finally people that can make a difference, like the legislature, are waking up and doing something about it.
And what I want to, Shea touched on it just a second ago, and the question I'd specifically like to ask Shea is, why are people trafficked, both worldwide and here in the U.S.? And then for the other panelists, everybody in this room really wants to know about what's going on and is passionate about it, and obviously you ladies on the panel, but are other people taking it seriously? So Shea, can you talk a little bit about why people are trafficked?
Sure, and my answer is specific to sex trafficking and sexual exploitation because that's my background and what I work on. But let's be honest, it's because of the demand. And, you know, I hear some numbers. I don't know how accurate they are, but human trafficking is a $32 billion worldwide industry. I don't know the breakdown of the differential between sex trafficking and labor trafficking, but $32 billion is a whole lot of money. And I get into the debate a lot with people, well, let's just legalize prostitution. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Decriminalize the individuals who sell sex. That's, you know, my opinion, and kind of move the U.S., and we can start here in Philadelphia, towards decriminalizing those who sell sex, the prostituted person, and start policing the demand. I know that in Philadelphia, individuals are being arrested all day, every day for the crime of prostitution. It is a crime. But, you know, if you want to talk about Kensington and Allegheny, which is our most notorious and well-known track where Jamie has the drop-in center with her staff, the reason why you can go there to buy sex, I mean, why these women are on the corners is because the men, and I'm, you know, let's be honest, it's men that are buying sex, know where to go. They absolutely know where to go. And who is buying sex? It doesn't know race. It doesn't know socioeconomic background. It doesn't know religion. It's not someone else's husband or someone else's boyfriend. It's not, let's just let the boys be boys, because how often do we hear that? Oh, they're going to go to the strip club. That's just boys being boys. It's everyone needs to start looking, and I can't say this enough, who is the demand? And we need to start saying, it's not okay to buy sex. Men need to stand up to their peers. Women need to start saying, you know, whose husband is buying sex? Because that's who they are. These are married men. It's easy to buy sex. You can go on Backpage.com. They start posting ads all day, every day. It's not just in Philadelphia. It's not just a city problem. It's a human rights issue. And we as a community need to start saying, you know, let's go after the demand. Let's just go after them. Because if you decrease the demand, or if they are prosecuted for buying sex because it's illegal to buy sex, why are we only enforcing one law on the books? Why aren't we enforcing, and how's that working out for us, quite frankly, right? It's not. We're prosecuting individuals who are being victimized and traumatized on a daily basis by not just their traffickers, by the men that buy sex from them. This is not Pretty Woman. This is not Hollywood. Richard Gere is not going to buy you a $250,000 ruby fancy necklace, and you're not going to ride off in the fancy car into the sunset. The reality is, these men that buy sex throw women out of cars. They hold them at knife point. They hold them at gunpoint. They brutalize them and beat them. We had a woman at Dawn's place last year who had a traumatic brain injury because the John threw her out of the car, and that wasn't enough. He then stomped on her head. We need to start policing demand. Sorry, I get really heated.
That's all right. I won't tell you to stop.
May I just add
Oh, yes,
a little
please,
bit?
please.
Just want to just piggyback a little bit on Shea. So with that, these same men that are buying also have jobs, most of them. And what we found is, as we began to send these young victims to service providers, that we have to police the service providers, because there are people who work really good jobs, jobs that help people, jobs that, you know, seek to save the world, who have this inner deep secret, and after 5 o'clock become someone else. And so we've had the experience of having, you know, these victims confronted by people that they know from the life, that they know may not have bought sex from them, but bought sex from someone else that they know. So imagine the feeling of those of us who feel like we're really doing a great thing and changing the world, and we're sending young people, young victims, into the face and hands of the people that we're trying to save them from. So it's very disturbing, it's very difficult. Everybody is suspect. Everyone is suspect, and that's really hard, because how do you manage that? So do we then push to change questions on employment applications? You know, these people may not have anything on their record, but how do you test the core of a person when you're hiring them? And then is that even legal? So we have a lot of work that is not even really surface stuff, but it's inner stuff, because this is a dark, hidden issue, whether it be hidden in a house or a massage parlor, but it's also hidden in the heart. So how do you really test that? So you talk about why people are trafficked. Well, because trafficking and the spirit of trafficking really is so evasive, and we don't really know how to stop it.
And Shea had touched on the reason that people are sex trafficked. And Liz, can you talk about why people are labor trafficked?
Sure. I mean, most of our clients who are I think most victims of labor trafficking in the U.S. are immigrant workers coming from countries where there's a lot of financial and political instability. And so they come to the U.S. often under the auspices of a lawful program, like a lawful guest worker program like the H-2A or H-2B program, which are programs that allow employers in the U.S. to bring in temporary workers from foreign countries if they're able to prove that they're not sufficient U.S. workers to do the job, and to work in low-skilled industries like agriculture or landscaping, certain types of domestic labor, to work in the traveling carnival industry. The problem with these guest worker programs is that they're inherently vulnerable to exploitation. You know, the Southern Poverty Law Center wrote a report called "Close to Slavery," describing these programs a few years ago, and that's because essentially that's what the programs are. Workers come in under these programs, and they have no job portability. They're tied to the one employer who's sponsored them. If they often incur thousands of dollars of debt to come to the U.S. and to work for anywhere from say 6 to 8 weeks to work in the crab picking industry in Maryland, or up to 8 to 10 months working in landscaping in Pennsylvania, and then you know, in order to stay lawful under the program, to have lawful status, they have to continue working for the same employer and then return home at the end of the season. So they really have no incentive to complain or to leave the program, because there's really no other options for them, and it really creates a situation where employers who want to exploit a worker, it's very easy for them to do that, and there's very few situations we've seen where workers are willing to complain because they risk losing thousands of dollars. They risk retaliation to themselves and to their families in their home countries. They risk blacklisting and the inability to come back lawfully even through another employer in the future.
So let me just pose then this question to the whole panel. As I said, everybody in the room is really invested in this issue, and everybody on the panel, but are other folks taking the issue seriously?
Sure. I mean, I don't think I have a terribly long answer to this, besides I think that some people are definitely taking this issue very seriously, and some people are not aware that it's happening still in the United States, or that it is happening both to foreign national and domestic individuals on both labor and sex trafficking. So I think there's just a huge lack of awareness, and I think there's a need for the whole kind of paradigm shift in communities and in society to transcend what we see on the surface as, for example, either prostitution or an undocumented worker who we just assume is illegal and they're exploiting our system, to be much more mindful about how we view those people in our communities, and be willing to ask them questions and be willing to get to know them and to get to know their stories and to understand the layers and layers of trauma that's beneath that, and fear and coercion that's keeping them from talking and coming forward. So I think that there's not probably enough people that are in places of power that are willing to kind of begin looking at that paradigm shift so we can get to the root of victims.
And one of the questions from the audience that I wanted to ask is, could someone define the difference between prostitution and trafficking?
Sure. I get that question asked a lot. Is every person who's prostituting being trafficked? No, not every person who's prostituting has a pimp. But are they being, commercially, sexually exploited? In my opinion, yes. There's sexual exploitation in that. There's gender-based inequality involved in that. And I can't tell you, I have yet to meet, in all the years that I've been working directly with prostituted persons, where they did not at some point have a trafficker. And that trafficker may have been their mother's paramour, their older brother's best friend, their mother, because a lot of times this is happening at the very beginning in a home. Not across the board, but most of these women were sexually abused as children and by someone that they knew and traded, for sex. So regardless of whether or not they're now homeless and drug addicted and living in abandoned miniums in the Kensington section of this city, they are being sexually exploited. And, there is this whole sort of underground world that we all overlook. And people think that it's just a matter of these women being addicted to drugs and they're, just getting to their next trick, either directly for drugs or for money to purchase drugs. But I know that the drug addiction is the result of the exploitation. It's not what fuels the exploitation. I can assure you wholeheartedly that if I were being forced to have sex, let's be low in the numbers, with 8 different men a day, and the numbers are way higher than that, but 8, quite frankly 4, I would do whatever it took to disassociate from that situation and not be there. And if that's heroin, which started off as beer and then pills, I would do that. But do I think I know that all prostituted persons don't have pens. They're not all being trafficked, but they are absolutely victims of commercial sexual exploitation.
And there is no such thing as a child prostitute.
Yeah, that's an oxymoron. That doesn't exist.
So,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you didn't hear me? Did everybody hear me? There's no such thing as a child prostitute.
Another question from the audience that I'd like to ask Liz is we are finding that in labor trafficked victims, their lifestyle in the U.S. is better than what they experienced in their home country, as well as in non-trafficked persons. We can't help them until they acknowledge they need help, correct?
I'm not sure that it's true that, it's not true that people who are victims of labor trafficking, that their lifestyle is better here in the U.S. All of the immigrant workers that I speak to come to the U.S. Out of sheer necessity, and it's, they don't want to leave their families back in their home country, but they have no other option generally because of the financial situation in their home country. And, they may be living in a nicer house in the U.S., but they're living in a room with 4 other people. And I think one of the challenges we face is that it is difficult to reach out to victims of labor trafficking because there is a lot of distrust of authority figures. There's a lot of distrust of people from outside of the community and of people who don't speak their language. A lot of our clients are not literate even in their own native language, so that's an issue. But I think we've been successful in doing outreach in a way that is culturally appropriate, and I think there just needs to be more of that in order to find victims and to make them feel comfortable and willing to come forward.
And Judge, if you could address what law enforcement needs to do to handle this issue, and also the rest of the panel. If we could start with Judge Dumas.
There are a few things that law enforcement can do, and I think that for the most part in our jurisdiction that our law enforcement, our police department is very open to being a player in this struggle. So we've invited them to sit on various, efforts or committees that are leading efforts in this regard. They've been very receptive to, as far as I know, very receptive to, at least where the juveniles are concerned. I think it's a little easier for them to wrap their heads around. There's no such thing as a child prostitute. We're moving towards trying to get this whole notion that children should not be arrested for that crime, really, the law of the land. And they're on board with that. I think it's easier for them to really embrace that. And so they are involved in the efforts. They are willing to sit down at the table to kind of work out the strategies to make that happen. Law enforcement, first and foremost, like all of us, has to not only raise the awareness throughout the department, but also the training. The training is necessary for them to really be able to play the part that they need to play. So, along with the training inside the walls of law enforcement, but also for those officers that are on the street, especially, to continue to enhance their training, continue to develop policies that are consistent with victim services as opposed to prosecution, and just continue to be a partner really is what we need them to do. And I don't think that we've had much pushback, at least as it relates to the juvenile victims, on that particular issue, that they are willing to participate. They're on board. A lot of them have children. They have daughters. They understand, for the most part, the leadership, I will say, understands that this is a problem, and then they're willing to be involved in a significant way.
So in order to maintain certification to be a police officer in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the MOPEC Commission, which stands for the Municipal Police Officers Education and Training Commission, mandates that they have to attend a certain number of hours every year like continuing education to maintain their certification. You sometimes hear that it's Act 180 training because it's codified, it's a law. So Pennsylvania enacted trafficking in persons in 2006. It was a brand new law in the books. In 2008, in the legal updates, because that's part of their mandatory training every year, they got 2 slides. By the way, we have a new law at the end. That was it. It wasn't, this is what human trafficking is. It was just, FYI, we got a new law. Then in 2012, Jamie, is that when the hotline passed?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so in 2012, the hotline passed, the 888-3737-888 number. My sister's a cop, so I know a lot of what they're trained on in Act 180 and in MPO training, and I was a DA for 10 years, so I know what their training is. And in 2014, when my sister went to Act 180 training, she had 1 page in her book. She took a picture on her cell phone and texted it to me. "We have human trafficking, look, this is a joke." She literally texted me that. It was on the hotline number. That was it. By the way, there's a hotline number out there. Okay, that's great. So in 2015, the good news is every single police officer in the Commonwealth will have to mandatory live training. Attend live training, not web training, not read it in a book training, live training, 3-hour block on human trafficking. I've trained every trainer in the state on that. That includes all of the new provisions in Act 105. It includes investigations, identifications. And I trained, I'm MOPAC certified to train police. So when we were looking at the curriculum that was developed by the MOPAC Commission, myself and the law enforcement officer who works for the federal government and Homeland Security, who is in their trafficking and smuggling unit, when Steph and I looked at this, we freaked out a little bit because in some of the slides there were, photographs of what's disseminated in the media. Kids in handcuffs, little girls in pinafore dresses sitting on the edge of the bed with ponytails in a hotel room. And the reality of the situation is that's not what a human trafficking victim looks like. So law enforcement will now be trained on what they actually look like for real. Like the teenage girl covered in tattoos, like the adult woman who has a black eye who also looks like a domestic violence victim. The curriculum is very thorough. And I was asked over the weekend at an event in Penn State, is that 3-hour block of training enough? Absolutely not. But it's a start. They have to start somewhere. So it's a start. And I don't, want to blame the police for not investigating this at the local level. You can't blame someone for not knowing what they don't know. But it's also a matter of continuing to have that dialogue. So one of the things that my institute is tasked with doing, we have grant funding, is training law enforcement. And I've reached out to these trainers and said, hey, do you need enhancements? Do you need technical assistance? And we're available for that. And I'm hopeful that after this 3-hour block of training, that some of them will come forward and say, you know what, can you come to my department and do some advanced training? But this 3-hour block, by the end of 2015, every certified police officer in the Commonwealth will have at least the 101, human trafficking, and that's both labor and sex trafficking.
To just build on what has been said, something that hopefully will also get more detailed out in the upcoming trainings with law enforcement to look forward to is we've mentioned elements of the law are force, fraud, and coercion to kind of distinguish trafficking from other forms of crime. So we have an act, some sort of recruitment or harboring of individuals, not always transporting them across borders, right? You just need one of the 5 acts. And then you need some sort of a means, which are force, fraud, and coercion. And I just want to mention that that third mean, coercion, is probably the one that's most often used, I would say, in commercial sex trafficking. I'd say also in labor trafficking it's used very frequently. It's also probably the hardest to distinguish because of trauma and because of just the elements of control that coercion plays out, threatening a family member, threatening family members back home if somebody's international, threatening them if they live in North Philadelphia, getting their identification and saying, I know where you live and I'll hurt your family, your kids. So coercion and psychological manipulation are very huge elements that are both in the law, right, because we recognize we need to have that there because that's part of trafficking. But it's also, I would say, I'm not an attorney, but one of the most challenging things to prove and to kind of get a victim to even come forward and agree to, right? So you might have a 16-year-old who says that I love my pimp, and that happens a lot. We deal with that very, very frequently, and so that's something that I think we need a lot more training, bridging between law enforcement and victim services, and I know that Judge Dumas has led that a lot, bringing even us in, myself or our team, to talk about trauma bonding and psychological manipulation and what that does and how a victim is going to present to you when you arrest them or you come in contact with them. And it's something great that's in Act 105, but is still very, very much needed to be expanded upon. And also the use of vacating convictions of an individual that then becomes trafficked. So hopefully we'll see law enforcement kind of utilizing that to really help victims when they're in the process of kind of aftercare and getting their life together, right? We want to wipe off those convictions that are associated with the crime of trafficking, because that's going to hinder them as they move forward in applying for jobs and getting into colleges, et cetera. So.
And did you want to add something?
No.
Okay, there's a question from the audience, is there a statute of limitation on prosecuting a trafficker?
It's in the Act.
Yeah, I'll look it up.
It's in the Act.
Yes,
Shay's
yes,
looking up.
there's the statute of limitations.
And
That's
it's
the answer,
different-
yes.
Yeah,
No,
it's
I'll tell you what
different
it is.
for adults and children
Yeah,
based upon
it's,
the ages.
I should know this by heart.
And it doesn't matter.
So it's
if
18 years for, it's
It-
until, if you're, so it's
it's-
30 for a
Yeah,
child.
it until you're 30 after, yes, 18 years after, yeah. And then it's 12, I think, or 5 for the
12.
other. Is it 12?
Mhm.
Okay,
She's looking for.
sorry.
And that's for both, either sexual trafficking or labor
Correct.
trafficking? Okay.
I think. Wait, I'm looking. You can ask another
Well,
question.
yeah,
We'll
well,
come
while
back.
she's looking, since we have a few minutes left for some questions before
Did I put this down?
the audience has a chance to specifically ask some questions, I want to talk about resources and things like that. So, Jamie, do you want to talk about what types of services are offered and needed for specific survivors? I know that you had talked about just in general more training.
So services, there's a need for a lot of various victim services, and depending on the type of victim or survivor that we're talking about, they're going to need a lot of different services. So housing, counseling, mental health treatment, financial services, aftercare services that are going to include everything that's in our traditional kind of social service network, but also it's going to require everybody to kind of work together. So, for example, there's a lot of agencies in this room today, even with various nonprofits that serve individuals who are trafficked. So it's everything from shelter, short-term, long-term. There's definitely a need for more long-term, very specific minor housing. So, for example, there's a lot of minors that Judge Dumas has mentioned in the court, and there's not a lot of specific programs just for those minors that can really address their needs. So they're in traditional programs across the state, but there's a lot of challenges that they present that our programs are not always set up to address. So, housing, mental health, and financial and reintegration services. Liz, do you want to talk about labor trafficking? Probably different than us.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest challenges is, in terms of social services, is finding legal services. Victims of trafficking are often low-income people, and they need legal services, whether it's to recover wages that are owed to them or to get the immigration services they need. And there's really just, a limited number of nonprofit organizations that provide those services for free or for a low cost. And so that's one area where I think we need a lot of help, is to, to get more funding to allow the programs that have attorneys and support staff that have the expertise that's necessary to do this work, or if there could be more funding to train pro bono attorneys. The issue with a lot of this work is that it's very labor intensive and that it's very technical. So it's not something that someone can just pick up and handle with minimal training. So that's an area where I think that there's still a great need.
I just want to add to that too, because you just made me think of the intensive part. We do a pretty intensive case management, mobile case management piece, and that's a service that is not necessarily out there but offered by a lot of agencies, but just being able to follow an individual to every appointment, to really champion them, to support them. I know all the staff that are here, you know, they answer their phone at any time of day, on the weekend when a woman's in crisis or needs to talk to somebody. That could be a healthy contact for them to call versus somebody from their former life. So having agencies and staff that are really dedicated to be on the clock, you know, 24/7, to meet people on a rainy, snowy day, like on foot by the subway, and go with them to detox and sit there for 4 hours while they try to get enrolled, and then to follow up with them immediately the next day to see if they went there and if they stayed there. So it's very labor intensive even on the social service end.
In the essence of time, I want to combine a few questions for Judge Dumas. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges that minors face, since legally they can't consent to sex, and should there be a special court specifically to handle the trafficking cases for minors?
Well, the second question is so easy because, of course, there should be specialty courts because that's what we have started here in Philadelphia. I think that it's such a unique issue, and the needs of the victims are so different than some of the other, just kind of like the regular types of cases that we hear. I mean, yes, there's sexual assault involved usually. You know, yes, these children are traumatized and they have trauma needs. But there's a uniqueness about being trafficked. It's one thing to be sexually assaulted, which is a tragedy in itself, but to have the trafficking issues on top of that really puts trafficking in a category all of its own, in my opinion. That the trauma training that these young people need, or that any trafficked individual would need, it's different. There's like a twist, and I'm not a clinician, but I know that it's one thing to be assaulted in a sexual way and have to deal with that trauma. It's another thing to have someone beating you and making you go and sell yourself to someone else day after day after day after day, to the point where you feel, or you are, a slave. Like, I don't even know what that type of trauma treatment looks like. I mean, really. And I think that even in our clinical fields, and Jamie, you can kind of chime in on this, it's evolving. What really needs to happen to truly help these young people heal. So that's why the court should be a specialty court. Not only that, everybody can't do this work. It is not an indictment against anyone who says, this is just too much for me to handle. But it is more of a tragedy to have everyone doing it because it's just kind of treated like everything else and making a mess of the lives of these people who really need help. I can't describe how it feels on a monthly basis to sit with these children and these families and try to work through these issues. I never cry in court. I've been sitting for almost 12 years. We had a case Wednesday in our court, in our human trafficking court, where I had to pull the tissues out. I could not. I tried. I sat there. I tried to do my norm. I'm not. And I kept saying to myself, I'm not going to. And as I saw, this was my 13-year-old. As I saw her, she cried through the entire hearing. Through the entire hearing. Her mother cried. She cried. Everyone in the courtroom had tissues by the time we finished because there was nothing else that we could do at that point but to cry with her. So, can you imagine that in every courtroom?
No.
It can't happen. It's just the issues are too sensitive. The work is too delicate. The courtrooms need to be closed to the public for these types of cases. So that just doesn't make sense to have that widespread throughout a courthouse. So yes, I do believe that specialty courts are necessary to deal with these issues. What was the first question?
I can answer that.
What are the challenges that minors face?
Okay, you want to chime in on that?
Well, yeah,
Go.
I can.
Okay.
And actually, I think Jamie can talk more specifically about the challenges that minors face. But with respect to these specialty courts or diversion courts, You know, you hear a lot like, what's the next piece of legislation that we need to protect these kids? And it's unfortunate that we do need this particular piece of legislation, which is safe harbor, which mandates that the justice system treat these children as victims. And then there are two camps within this need for safe harbor. One is divert them criminally, right? Put them in a diversion program. The piece of legislation that was out there last session, which thankfully died, it was safe harbor legislation that called for diversion of children who, with a first-time offense, if they cooperated with against their trafficker. Are you kidding me? You have a 14-year-old who's going to cooperate against their trafficker the first time? Yeah, no, it's not going to happen. Diversion should not need to be the option. These children need immunity. You cannot be 14 years old and commit the crime of prostitution when the overt act that you're committing statutorily you can't consent to in the first place. It's called statutory sex. That's why 14-year-olds can't have sex with 25-year-olds. They don't have the ability to consent, and the legislature protects them from that. So how on earth can the same legislature turn around and say, we can arrest a child for the crime of prostitution? It does not make sense. Not in the law, not in the world of morality. These children should be immune from it. And just to touch on like how law enforcement gets it with the kids, because that's a no-brainer. If you've been involved since you're 14, on your 18th birthday, you don't get a piece of paper that says do-over. So like, it's not a cutoff. And just because you're 25, you don't get a do-over. You know, these people need immunity. And it's unfortunate that we even need to go to the legislature and say, you know what, you got to make a law about this. But Pennsylvania is in a position, and all of you are constituents in Pennsylvania, to say we need an immunity safe harbor bill. Immunity. Sorry.
So some of the other challenges that young people face is just the stability of a village. Mm-hmm. A lot of our young people do not have parents that exist, number one, but those who do don't understand human trafficking, don't understand anything because they're kind of wrapped up in their own issues. Some of our guardians and parents were participants. So imagine a child who has been, I would say at least 90%, 95% of the young people that are in my court have been sexually abused in some way, at some point in their lives.
Outside of the trafficking?
Outside of the trafficking, which is a risk factor. For those of you who aren't sure or want to know about risk factors, that is a huge risk factor to being trafficked, is when there is some form of sexual abuse in life. The studies show that when a child is sexually abused, at that point in time, their developmental process stops. So if I have a 15-year-old that was sexually abused at 10, then I'm not even dealing with the 15-year-old making the decisions in this whole trafficking life. I have a 10-year-old. So I'm looking at a 15-year-old, dealing with a 10-year-old, trying to get this young lady on board with the treatment that she needs, with no village to help support that and continue to be that type of nurturing support that she needs. Just a bunch of strangers trying to get her to understand why she needs to be saved. And then for those who are still in the community with this pull from her peers to stay involved, not even necessarily the pimp, but the other kids that he has working for him or her, pulling this kid in, and not, once again, no one knows what's going on. So then we have parents, and we have educators, and we have social workers who are so out of touch, they have no idea what's going on. And we have these young people that are just lost, that are trying to figure it all out, and they get swooped up in this life to the point where it's hard to get out. And I tell people, my regular kids in the juvenile justice system, once you get in, it's hard to get out. It's the same thing with this type of life. They get in, and then they're there, and they're like, okay, oh my God, like I can't just go out and open the door and go out if I choose to, because they have no choice anymore. And so those are obstacles, the lack of services. We're trying to catch up. This life has been going on for quite some time. We're just trying to catch up to them and to be able to create services that are going to actually impact their lives and their trauma. And so, without that, it's a struggle. It's an uphill battle. And so those struggles, if we can't figure it out for them, then they are, when you say what struggles, what obstacles do they face, that's a huge obstacle if we can't figure it out and figure it out quickly.
So then what do we do? What do the people in this room, we'll go down the line before we throw it to the audience for specific questions, but what can everybody in this room do, either to advocate on this issue or specifically with the organizations that you're representing?
So one thing that I think people can do is advocate and try to work with their legislators to improve our immigration laws in this country. I think that as long as there are as long as we have a subclass of workers who have no way of getting lawful immigration status, we're going to have labor trafficking in this country. I think the steps that President Obama took to provide for limited immigration relief for some individuals in this country is a step in the right direction. Unfortunately, I don't think it goes far enough. So that, I think, is something huge that needs to happen. And another thing that I think people can do is, on a more personal level, is to talk to their, go into the grocery store or their food co-op and talk to them about carrying products with a food justice certification standard, which is like a domestic fair trade label that's being developed by a coalition of farmers, of responsible farmers, of farm workers, and other organizations. To ensure that the food that carries the label is farmed appropriatly and according to fair kind of labor standards. Another thing is, we have a anti-trafficking hotline, and it's a really easy number to remember. You can pass it out. It's 888-3737-888. Just let people know the number, and they will get patched through to appropriate services. So it's 888-3737-888. It's a palindrome, so it's pretty easy to remember.
David?
Specifically, I guess, what you can do locally in Philadelphia with our organizations. So I work with the Salvation Army, and we do lots of different things with trafficking in the city, but you can volunteer in person at New Day Drop-In Center if you are interested in actually kind of being on the ground. We do volunteer trainings, so you have to be trained to volunteer in the center. And so actually our next training is February 24th. So anybody can see Ariel, actually, or Gina, if you want to volunteer. So we always have a need for that. We have a need for supplies, food, clothing, toiletries. I know Women's Way is doing a drive this month for in-kind donations, but beyond this month, we need those every month. Like I said, right, we had over 1,000 contacts, and I actually didn't even include the December stats yet with that. So we had about 200 contacts in December. So we see a lot of women coming through the doors, and we try to serve them, in the best way we can. So we always have a need of kind of in-kind donations if you don't want to necessarily be there in person. And we also have a Philadelphia Anti-Trafficking Coalition that meets bi-monthly. It meets at the Salvation Army on 701 North Broad Street. It's the fourth Tuesday of every other month at 2 p.m. So you can come to that meeting and learn more about what's going on in the city and find out other ways to get involved. But all these organizations are represented there, as well as about 50 others are on the listserv.
The next meeting is January 27th.
Yes, at 2 p.m. next week.
You can do as little or as much as you want. My institute is looking to take the academic research that we're doing and the technical assistance and training that we're provided to the next level, and we would like to provide direct services for victims and in collaboration with the needs of the women specifically in the drop-in center. They have all kinds of legal needs, from trying to reunify with their children to getting their convictions vacated. And that takes money and additional staff people. So, Villanova, my institute's always looking for monetary donations. But you can do something as little as this. Everybody has Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. just post the hotline for a while. You can go online, there's cool photographs, just post the hotline. Ask other people to share the hotline number. You can host an awareness raising event. You can volunteer, like Jamie said. Dawn's Place is always looking for volunteers. The Drop-In's always looking for volunteers. If you have a particular expertise that isn't necessarily related to on-the-ground direct services, but you are interested in communications, I'd be willing to talk to you about coming up with, when Senate Bill 75 became Act 105, the $1.5 million fiscal note was cut off of it. So there's a lot of work to be done, and the Commonwealth isn't paying for it. One of those things is a public awareness campaign. You got ideas about a public awareness campaign? Join us in PATH. Shoot me an email. It's shay.rhodes@law.villanova.edu. I'll say that again slow. But we, in the non-governmental sort of community advocacy groups, came together to say we need to get this implemented. There's no money to do it. So, if you want to volunteer some of your time and be involved in a communications campaign, whatever your expertise is, if you're interested in this at all, I'm sure that one of us could find something specific for you to do. And it's as much as coming up with 7 tubes of toothpaste that you get when you go to the dollar store and dropping it off at the drop-in center, small or big.
So I'm going to get real deep right now for a minute and ask that each of you look within your village, your children, your nieces, nephews, because we talked about girls a lot, but there are boys, there are male victims as well. Your, young people that you babysit or come in contact with, pay attention to what's going on in their lives. Lots of times, these young ladies or these young men become victims because no one's paying attention. If you have access to these young people via social media, because that's how they communicate. If you have a young person living in your house, pay attention. It's not invasive to look at their Facebook page, look at their text. I'm not trying to tell you how to parent, but this is an epidemic. This is serious. So if you have access to a young person and access intimately where you have the right or the authority to look into their personal world, talk to them. Ask them about things that are, going on. Because lots of times what we learn about other victims by talking to the victims that we already have. We learn about traffickers by talking to the victims that we already have. You may have a daughter that's in school that you don't worry about at all, but she has a friend or someone that she knows. Talk to your children or those children that you come in contact with, because it's that conversation that can make a difference between life and death. So we can volunteer all day long. We need to get involved in the struggle, in the fight. We need to write our politicians. We need to do all of that, but let's not forget home. Because home, sometimes while we're saving the world, home needs some saving too. We need to pay a little attention and tighten things up at home too. Because some of our children, some of our relatives are being approached and they don't know what to do with that. And unless someone takes the time to talk to them about what's going on, how are you doing? You may have grandchildren. I'm looking around with a wide array of ages in this room. So touch a young person's life if necessary, if you have an opportunity to, because that young person could be the very young person that needs to be rescued.
And I have one last ask that is not as heavy-hearted, so we're going to balance it out here. That's good, though.
I do it all the time.
If anybody is interested, it is tax season, so also in terms of financial contributions, we have some tangible work that needs to be done in the drop-in center as well, so our plumbing could use some help. So if anybody has access to that or wants to make an in-kind donation, it's a very practical need. So you can see me afterwards.
So I wasn't able to incorporate a lot of questions that folks had written down on their index cards, and we have a few minutes that if there are folks that in the audience that have questions, we'll do it old school if you can raise your hand, and then the tables have mics and they're just push on, push off. So does anybody have any questions for the panel? Yes?
I was just wondering if your programs have emergency services, if we identify a victim, and how could we access that?
So I guess the national hotline, which is what Liz pointed out, the 888-3737-888, is a 24/7 hotline, which will then get in touch with local nonprofits and law enforcement in a region depending on where your report and tip is being made. We will be starting, at the beginning we mentioned that the Salvation Army received a Department of Justice Office of Victims of Crimes Human Trafficking Award. I won't say the rest of the name. That's a 2-year grant, 24-month grant. We have 4 sub-partners on that, so National Youth Service Center, Friends of Farmworkers, Covenant House, Don's Place, and also the Institute is consulting on that. So we have a lot of really strong partners that are also contracted under that with us. And through that, we will also have a local 24/7 hotline that we will be kind of giving out probably in the community to individuals. We won't do it at public awareness events, but the national number, the 888, will have that local hotline number. So we will be streamlining and giving immediate response to the hotline calls through that. That is currently not up and running yet because we are still waiting on the Department of Justice to release our funds. So once they do that, we will begin.
Additionally, the steering committee that has been formulated, there's a group of leaders that has formed the steering committee that is developing a multi-system response to victims in Philadelphia. We don't have everything up and running either, but that is in the works. As I said, we're catching up. So the goal is to create a system citywide that will encompass all of the efforts of all of the different organizations that are fighting the fight as individuals and make it one unified system so that you would know exactly what to do if a victim came across your path at 3 o'clock in the morning. So we are working towards that.
Are there any? Yes?
Has outreach been done to our community high school, the high school, as we saying, it started at the age of 12 and up? Has anything been done for kind of do a prevention piece and talking with the young people themselves about what's going on?
So that same committee has the school district sitting at the table, and that is exactly what was that look for? So but we have to do it the right way. We have to do it the right way. So we invite them to the table, and I will say that the leader that is at the table,
They're really receptive.
yes, is very receptive and was clueless, but for the invitation. So, and has been to every meeting, which is a step in the right direction. So what I would say is, as we are trying as a system to build, if you have any type of connection with the school, it may start with your school. It may start with your class. To do it, all of us have access to all kind of materials and posters and things of that nature. I used to have in the old building where we had my posters in the courtroom, but I can't do it in the new building. But there we have posters, we have videos, we have links, all of that you can show your classes, and it may start there. You can't, it's such a huge problem. Everybody can't save the world, but if everybody does a little bit, then the word will get out. It has. I mean, the tremendous progress that's been made just with us and family court in the last year is tremendous. Just continuing to beat the pavements and get people to kind of jump on board.
And there have been a lot of groups that have gone into the district. Like Ariel and Gina just spoke to middle schoolers, like 80 middle schoolers last week. I don't remember which high school, but in North Philadelphia. And that was because a teacher invited us and they set up a whole auditorium and had them talk for 45 minutes to all the students. I know Covenant House is doing that. I think Women Against Abuse does a lot of kind of relationship and sexual violence, which then teaches kids to talk about it. So there's a lot of nonprofits that are doing lots of different educational.
And I've been invited in by students. I've been invited in by students at different schools, out in the suburbs here in Philadelphia, and I teach a workshop every spring with the police department. They have a program for youth called the Community Health Enrichment Empowerment Resource Services. We need $1,500 for the closing ceremonies, by the way. We really do. So I teach those kids, and some of the parents have been there, and the parents have asked me to come and talk to their students' class. So it's like one at a time. But my institute has offered to provide technical assistance and train all the teachers, all the principals, all the school nurses. And we have a meeting about that next week. So I'm hoping the district will open it up like on an in-service day and just let us train, teachers. I'm hopeful, fingers crossed.
And one of the things that I'll add is something that Women's Way advocates for that is not done in Pennsylvania is there is not comprehensive sex education in this state. So one of the things that, and Judge Dumas touched on this, is a lot of times what you find, especially when you're young kids in middle school and in high school, they're not necessarily being taught kind of how to empower themselves and how to have self-esteem if they're lacking in self-esteem, and what's okay and what's not, and that it's not okay to be touched certain ways. A lot of times they don't know that, and many times they don't know that, and comprehensive sex education would help establish that, but that is not something that we can do in Pennsylvania. Most states teach abstinence-only education. Some states teach something else called abstinence plus, which kind of teaches about condom use and things like that. But we're really not teaching comprehensive sex education, which is something that kids need to know so that they can also understand if potentially something could be happening to them or to a friend or a family member. Our executive director, Wendy, is going to have some closing remarks, but can we have a round of applause for the panelists?
Just to second what Diana said, I was a sexuality educator for several years, and not only do we not offer it when it's offered too late. I think everybody wants to talk about comprehensive sexuality education in high school, but kids need to know about this starting in elementary school. I mean, many girls start going through puberty starting at age 10. They don't need to learn about what's already happened to them when they're 12. So we need to start pushing this earlier and earlier, and these conversations can happen when kids are really young. I have a 5-year-old. I just had a conversation with her about consent a couple days ago. It was very interesting. I said, if somebody tries to kiss you or touch you, they need to have your permission. And she said, yeah, like Kristoff in Frozen. So kids notice these things, and I think it doesn't have to be hard to have these kinds of conversations. But again, I also wanted to thank the panelists, not just for being here today, but also just for all the work you do. I know it's just so essential. And I also want to take a moment and thank the Women's Way staff. They're just the best, wonderful, most awesome group of women you could ever work for. They work really hard today to put together. And I also want a special shout out for Diana Marcus, who really did the heavy lifting for today. And final note about our in-kind donation drive. There's a box here today. We have drop-off points at Women's Way. We also have drop-off points, I think, somewhere else in North Philadelphia. Is it North Philadelphia? In Kensington. And then, thank you, I should know these things. And then also we have an Amazon wish list, and we will continue to advocate on this issue. So if you're interested, you can also come to us and we can plug you in or get you involved in our efforts. So thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful, wonderful day and weekend.
That wasn't really the issue. The big issue of training about the training.
Oh,
yes,
okay.
For Mid-Atlantic, Mid-Atlantic and Chacko. Okay. Yes. So I need to. I'm sorry.
Hi. How are you?
I don't know if you remember. I'm Casey Jones. I'm Councilman Jones' daughter.
Oh yeah. How are you? Good. Nice to see you. What's your name?
Yeah, that's why I kind of wanted everybody to sit down, because otherwise it would have been a pain in the ass trying to get back here.
Yeah, no, this is really well. So,
Which is like, why didn't no one help me then? Y'all are helping now, but I don't know.
It's going okay. I don't know. You guys know what you're talking about.
But she's saying,